Happy New Year, everyone! Provided, of course, it's actually the new year where you live. For those using the Gregorian calendar, New Year's Day is January the 1st. However, while the Gregorian calendar is the most commonly used, it's not the only calendar in use, and the other calendars do not necessarily have their new year aligned to the beginning of their Gregorian calendar. So that got me wondering, when is the New Year's around the world? This isn't necessarily as straightforward of a question as it might seem. Some countries will use the Gregorian calendar for secular matters and to stay in sync with most of the rest of the world, but will observe holidays based on a religious calendar. Plus, a small number of countries just adopted their own calendar, like Ethiopia and Thailand. And some of the world's calendars are based on lunar cycles and not solar cycles. The problem with lunar cycles is they don't divide evenly into solar cycles, meaning the events based on lunar calendars tend to move dates on non lunar calendars. Turns out, the universe simply abhors nice, even numbers that our squishy human meat brains can easily process. The Chinese New Year, also known as the Lunar New Year or the Spring Festival, is a 15-day long period that begins sometime in late January to late February on the Gregorian calendar. It is celebrated in China and Chinese communities around the world. Legend has it that the Chinese New Year started thousands of years ago because a monster named Nian would attack villagers at the beginning of the year. The monster was allegedly scared of loud noises, bright lights, and the color red, hence the use of fireworks in Chinese New Year celebrations. These would force Nian to back off. Like the Chinese New Year, the Islamic New Year, also known as Hijri, is also based on a calendar derived from lunar cycles. The lunar Hijri calendar is 10 to 11 days shorter than the Gregorian one, resulting in Hijri moving around the months of June and July. Its start date can be anywhere from early June to mid July. The Islamic calendar's New Year is placed when the Prophet Muhammad and his followers migrated from Mecca to Medina and established the first Muslim settlement. It is worth noting that the lunar Hijri calendar is separate from the solar Hijri calendar, which is going to be important in the next couple of paragraphs. The Iranian New Year, also known as Nowruz, is different from the Islamic New Year and based on the solar Hijri calendar. It falls on the Northern Hemisphere spring equinox between March 19th and 22nd on the Gregorian calendar. It's also referred to as the Persian New Year, and it is celebrated in a much larger area than just modern day Iran. This is because the roots of Nowruz actually lie in Zoroastrianism, and celebrations of it date back as far as 3,000 years. Celebrations for Nowruz can be found in countries in Europe and Asia, ranging all the way from Albania and North Macedonia, through Iran and the Stan countries in Central Asia, all the way to even parts of India, Russia, China, and Mongolia. I mentioned part of India in that last sentence. That part of is extremely important. I think a lot of people far removed from India think of it as a monolithic culture, but that thought couldn't be further from the truth. India consists of over 700 tribes that speak over 100 languages. This has led to the somewhat unique situation where India has multiple New Years depending on where you are in the country. Amongst them are Diwali, also known as the Festival of Lights. Vikram Sawant is the Hindu New Year and can actually be on 3 different days depending on where you are. Puthandu is celebrated in southern India and Sri Lanka, while Ugadi is also celebrated in southern India. In addition, parts of India also celebrate the Bengali New Year, Pahela Baishak, or the Pakistani New Year, also known as Vaisakhi. And, as we already mentioned, parts of India celebrate Nowruz. Diwali falls in mid October to late November every year, whereas the rest of them tend to fall in late March to mid April. Another New Year celebration that overlaps with Nowruz in parts of the world is Kabin Nisan, the Assyrian New Year. It's celebrated every year on April 1st and is the official start of spring in areas where it's celebrated. The Assyrian calendar is a lunar calendar with fewer days than the Gregorian one, like the Hijri calendar, but in many areas where Kabid Nisan is celebrated, the Gregorian calendar was adopted, so it was decided to anchor the holiday on April 1st. Kabid Nisan is celebrated in southeastern Turkey, northeastern Syria, northern Iraq, and northwestern Iran. And because we can't have any clean distinction about when New Year's actually is, I should mention Aluth Uvaruda, which is a Sri Lankan New Year. This one, unlike Puthandu, is not shared with India and is unique to Sri Lanka. It is celebrated around the same time as Puthandu, mid April. The festivities include opening doors to friends, family, and community members, traditional regional foods, and boiling milk in a new earthen pot until it boils over, symbolizing prosperity. The Russian New Year is an interesting case. It falls on the standard Gregorian New Year, so why single it out, you ask? Well, it's because the Russian New Year, also known as Novy God, isn't just New Year's, it's also a de facto Christmas. The holiday started during Russia's hammer and sickle phase sometime in the 1930s. The Soviets could not celebrate Christmas due to its religious underpinnings, and the USSR being an officially atheist state. So they kind of pulled a play out of the Christian expansion playbook and just co opted the secular parts of Christmas and tacked them onto New Year's. They have Grandfather Frost, a Santa Claus analog, and they exchange gifts and food. The food is traditional Russian fare rather than Western, but the concept is basically the same. In ancient times, the Jewish calendar observed 4 separate days that could all be referred to as New Year's, each with their own distinct history. The first was on the first day of the Hebrew month of Nisan, also referred to as the New Year of Kings. This was used to mark the number of years a king had reigned. The second New Year's was the first of the month of Elul, which is the New Year of tithing of cattle. At this point, 1 out of every 10 cattle would be marked and offered as a sacrifice to God. Next was the first of Tishrei, or the agricultural New Year. Finally, the 15th of Shavat was known as the New Year of Trees. In modern times, the Jewish calendar has gotten it down to one New Year's Day, Rosh Hashanah, which is based on the Jewish calendar and celebrated sometime in early September to early October. Observance of this holiday includes specific foods, taking the day off work, blowing into a ram's horn called a shofar, and fortunately not sacrificing 10% of your cattle. Most of the countries of Southeast Asia seem to have their own New Year's. Some of them are derived from the countries having their own specific calendars, some from lunar calendars, and some from their own specific lunar calendars. Here's a list of the separate New Years of Southeast Asia, each with its own local customs. Songkran, the Thai New Year, which is celebrated on April 13th through 15th. I'm going to butcher this pronunciation, but Chol Chanam Thimi, the Cambodian New Year, which is celebrated between April 13th and 15th. Nyepi, the Balinese New Year, celebrated in Indonesia on March 7th. Tet, the Vietnamese New Year, celebrated in January or February. Thing Yan, the New Year in Myanmar, celebrated in mid-April. And as we already mentioned, Vaisakhi, the Pakistani New Year, and Pahela Baishakh, the Bengali New Year. While Mongolia and Korea probably don't qualify as Southeast Asia, they do have their own New Years. Japan does as well, but it happens to fall on January 1st. The Mongolian New Year, Sagansar, falls in early February to early March, and the Korean New Year, Salal, falls in late January to late February. Ethiopia also just has its own calendar for some reason, with its own New Year. This falls around September 11th or 12th on the Gregorian calendar, and falls at the end of Ethiopia's rainy season. This is a time where plants in the countryside are at their most robust, and part of the celebration involves songs and the exchange of flowers. The New Years I've listed thus far are either national or cultural over a wide area. It's worth noting that ethnic groups and tribes over smaller areas may have their own New Years as well, such as the Igbo people of Nigeria, who celebrate their New Year on the third week of February. The Maori in New Zealand celebrate Matariki in late June to mid-July. While I don't have the bandwidth to find every one, rest assured if you just blurt out Happy New Year on a random day, you may not be wrong. You just may be in the wrong part of the world at the time. And that will do it for this video. If you like the video, or want to correct my pronunciations because there are dozens of opportunities to do that in this video, feel free to like, subscribe, comment on, or share. And don't forget to ring the notification bell for more weekly content. Thanks for watching, and Happy New Year!